The cream-colored envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, its pristine surface unmarked except for Emma's name and address typed in stark black letters. She almost missed it among the wedding RSVPs that had been flooding her mailbox, but something about its clinical precision made her pause. No return address. No personal touch. Just cold, calculated intent. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she sliced it open, standing in her kitchen where morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. The granite countertop still bore traces of last night's dinner with Justin, a romantic evening planning their upcoming wedding, just 14 days away. Their wine glasses sat in the dish rack, a reminder of his toast to their perfect future. The letter inside was brief, typed in the same impersonal font: "Your fiancé is not who you think he is. Ask him about Lauren from the Chicago office. Don't let him destroy your life like he did mine." Emma's throat tightened as she read the words again, then a third time. The paper felt unusually heavy in her hands, as if weighted with unspoken accusations. She thought about Justin's recent business trips to Chicago, the late-night calls he'd step outside to take, claiming they were sensitive client matters. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, crumpling the letter. But her hand refused to throw it away. Instead, she smoothed it out, folded it carefully, and tucked it into her desk drawer. The same drawer that held their wedding invitation sample: "Justin Matthews and Emma Carter request the pleasure of your company." The juxtaposition made her stomach churn. That evening, when Justin came home, Emma studied him with new eyes. His familiar routine, loosening his tie, kissing her cheek, asking about her day, suddenly seemed like a performance. Had his smile always looked so practiced? Were those extra seconds he spent checking his phone normal, or signs of something more sinister? "How was Chicago last week?" she asked casually over dinner, watching his face for any telltale signs. Justin's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Productive," landed the Henderson account. He smiled, but something flickered in his eyes. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious about your new clients." Emma forced herself to take a bite of pasta, though it tasted like cardboard. "Must be nice having a whole office there to support you." "Yeah, good team." He reached for his wine glass, and Emma noticed a slight tremor in his hand. "Though I mostly work with corporate here in Boston." The lie slid out so smoothly, she almost missed it. Just last month, he'd mentioned working closely with the Chicago team on multiple projects. The discrepancy hung in the air between them, invisible but suffocating. Later that night, as Justin slept beside her, Emma lay awake, her mind racing. The anonymous letter could be a cruel prank or a vindictive act from someone jealous of their happiness. But why mention Lauren specifically? And why now, so close to the wedding? She rolled over, studying Justin's profile in the dim light. 5 years together, 3 of them living in this apartment, and suddenly she felt like she was sleeping next to a stranger. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, a late-night text. Emma's hand itched to reach for it, to confirm or deny her suspicions. But that would mean crossing a line, admitting that trust had already been broken. Instead, she slipped out of bed and went to her home office. Opening her laptop, she began to search. LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, anything that might connect Justin to a Lauren in Chicago. An hour later, she found her, Lauren Mitchell, marketing director at Justin's company's Chicago office. Young, beautiful, ambitious. Her social media was mostly private, but one photo caught Emma's eye, a group shot from a company event 3 months ago. Justin stood at the edge of the frame, his body angled toward Lauren, his expression unguardedly warm. Emma's cursor hovered over the message button on Lauren's profile. One click and she could ask directly, woman to woman. But what if the letter writer was wrong? What if this destroyed everything over nothing but paranoid speculation? Her wedding dress hung in the spare room closet, a white beacon of promises and dreams. The down payments for the venue, catering, and flowers were all non-refundable at this point. Their families had booked flights, taken time off work. The weight of expectations pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. As dawn began to color the sky, Emma made a decision. She wouldn't confront Justin yet. Instead, she'd watch and wait, gathering evidence either to disprove the letter's claims or confirm her worst fears. But deep down, in the quiet hours before morning, she already knew, something had shifted irreversibly, like the first crack in a foundation that would eventually bring the whole structure crashing down. Her phone buzzed, a text from Justin, "Morning, beautiful. Can't wait to marry you in 2 weeks. Love you always." Emma stared at the message, remembering all the times he'd made similar declarations. How many of them had been lies? And more importantly, was she strong enough to discover the truth, whatever it might be? She didn't reply. Emma's world unraveled not with a bang, but with the soft buzz of an incoming text message at 2:47 a.m. She hadn't meant to look at Justin's phone, hadn't wanted to be the kind of person who invaded their partner's privacy. But when his phone lit up on the nightstand for the third time that night, illuminating their bedroom with an accusatory glow, something inside her finally broke. Justin lay beside her, his breathing deep and even, unaware of how the foundations of their relationship were crumbling. The phone's screen showed a preview, "Lauren, I miss you. Last week in Chicago was." The rest disappeared into the ellipsis of unread messages. Emma's hands shook as she picked up the phone. Justin had always used the same password, her birthday, a detail that now felt less like romance and more like calculated manipulation. The messages loaded, revealing months of conversations, each one a fresh wound in her heart. The conference call was torture. "All I could think about was your hands. When can you come back to Chicago? I hate hiding this from everyone. I've never felt this way about anyone before." The timestamps painted a devastating picture. Messages sent during their date nights, during family dinners, even during their engagement party. While Emma had been planning their future, Justin had been carefully orchestrating a double life. She scrolled back further, her vision blurring with unshed tears. Their relationship had apparently started 6 months ago, during a business trip that Justin had claimed was absolutely crucial for his career. He'd even called Emma that night, describing a lonely dinner at his hotel. Now she knew he'd been with Lauren, probably laughing at how easily Emma believed his lies. The most recent exchange made her stomach lurch. "Lauren, what are we going to do about your wedding?" "Justin, I need time to figure things out. Emma doesn't deserve to be hurt. Lauren, she deserves the truth. We both know this isn't just a fling." "Justin, I know. These past months with you have been more real than my entire relationship with her." Emma set the phone down with trembling fingers, feeling as though she'd been plunged into ice water. The bedroom, their bedroom, suddenly felt foreign, every shared memory tainted by the knowledge of his betrayal. The photos on the walls, their tangled sheets, even the ring on her finger, all of it felt like props in an elaborate deception. She slipped out of bed and into the bathroom, gripping the cold porcelain of the sink as she stared at her reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow, older, wiser, and infinitely sadder. How many signs had she ignored? How many times had she silenced her intuition in favor of trust? The anonymous letter now felt like a lifeline rather than a threat. Someone had tried to warn her, to save her from an even greater heartbreak down the line. Wedding invitations sat on their dining room table, waiting to be mailed. Each one now represented not joy, but humiliation, hundreds of witnesses to her naivety. Dawn was approaching when Justin stirred, probably reaching for his phone as he did every morning. Emma heard him wake fully, heard the sharp intake of breath that meant he'd noticed his phone had been moved. She waited, seated at their kitchen table, as his footsteps approached. "Emma?" His voice carried a note of uncertainty she'd never heard before. "Why are you up so early?" She looked up at him, this man she thought she knew better than anyone. He stood in the doorway wearing the pajama bottoms she'd given him last Christmas, his hair tousled from sleep, looking so achingly familiar it made her chest hurt. "Tell me about Lauren," she said quietly. The color drained from his face. For a moment, he looked like he might deny it, might try to spin another web of lies. But then his shoulders slumped, and Emma saw something worse than deception in his eyes, relief. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I never meant for this to happen. But it did happen. And you let it keep happening. Every day, every message, every lie was a choice you made." Justin took a step toward her, hands raised in supplication. "Emma, please. We can work through this. I'll end it with her, When did you last see her?" Emma interrupted, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. His hesitation told her everything. "Last week. In Chicago. While you were picking out our wedding cake flavor over FaceTime." The memory of that call, how she'd thought he seemed distracted, how she'd convinced herself he was just busy with work, hit her like a physical blow. "I'm sorry," he repeated, the words hollow and insufficient. Emma stood, her chair scraping against the floor with a harsh finality. "I need you to leave." "What?" "Emma, no. Let's talk about this. The wedding." "There won't be a wedding." She pulled off her engagement ring, the diamond catching the early morning light one last time before she set it on the table. "I deserve better than being someone's second choice." As Justin stammered through more apologies and explanations, Emma felt something unexpected beneath her grief, a flicker of strength, of dignity. She'd lost her fiancé, her future plans, and her sense of security all in one night. But somehow, watching him try to justify his betrayal, she realized she'd gained something too, clarity. "I'll have your things packed by tomorrow," she said, cutting off his protests. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Later, after Justin had left with a hastily packed overnight bag, Emma sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by the detritus of their shared life. Wedding magazines mocked her from the coffee table. A save-the-date card was still pinned to the refrigerator. Their shared calendar marked the countdown to what should have been the happiest day of her life. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. Sarah, Lauren's former roommate." The pieces clicked into place. The anonymous letter, the warning, all from someone who had watched this pattern play out before. Emma's fingers hovered over her phone's keyboard as she considered her response, knowing that whatever she wrote next would be the first step on a very different path than the one she'd planned. The first week after discovering Justin's betrayal, Emma moved through her days like a ghost in her own life. The walls of her apartment held too many memories, each corner haunted by moments she now questioned. Had he been thinking of Lauren during their Sunday morning breakfasts? When they'd picked out the vintage coffee table together, had he already been planning a different future? It was Adam who finally broke through her self-imposed isolation, arriving one evening with takeout from their favorite Thai place and a quiet determination in his eyes. As her closest friend since college, he had a way of seeing through her carefully constructed facades. "You haven't been answering your phone," he said, setting down the bags of food. The familiar aroma of pad thai filled the apartment, momentarily displacing the heaviness that had settled there. Emma managed a weak smile. "I've been busy canceling wedding arrangements." She gestured to the stack of paperwork on her dining table, venue contracts, catering orders, florist agreements. Each cancellation came with its own financial penalty, like paying admission to leave her own life. Adam studied her face, seeing beyond the brave front she'd been trying to maintain. "You don't have to do this alone, you know." The simple statement cracked something in her chest. Emma sank onto her couch, the weight of the past week finally breaking through her carefully maintained composure. "I keep trying to understand when it all went wrong," she whispered. "When did I become so blind to what was happening right in front of me?" Adam sat beside her, close enough to offer comfort but giving her space to breathe. "This isn't about you being blind, Emma. It's about Justin being a master of deception. She thought about Sarah's text message, about Lauren's former roommate watching history repeat itself. Apparently, I'm not the first person he's done this to. There's a whole network of women he's hurt, connected by threads of betrayal I never knew existed. And yet you're still trying to handle everything perfectly, aren't you? Adam's voice held a note of gentle challenge. Canceling arrangements, managing the fallout, protecting everyone's feelings but your own. Emma stared at her hands, remembering how they'd trembled that night with Justin's phone. They were steady now, but something else shook inside her. I don't know who I am without the story I built around us, she admitted. 5 years of my life, shaped around being part of Emma and Justin. Now I have to figure out who Emma is on her own. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, Adam suggested quietly. The Emma I know has always been extraordinary, with or without Justin. Maybe it's time you got to know her too. His words stirred something in her memory, dreams and ambitions she'd gradually set aside, compromises made so subtle she hadn't noticed them accumulating. The interior design business she'd wanted to start, the vintage furniture restoration hobby she'd abandoned because Justin thought it took up too much space. I used to refinish old pieces, she said, running her hand along the arm of her grandmother's chair, the one Justin had wanted to replace with something more modern. I loved giving new life to things others had discarded. Adam's eyes lit up with recognition. I remember that summer you transformed my disaster of a coffee table into something beautiful. You have a gift for seeing potential where others don't. Justin never really understood that part of me. The realization came with surprising clarity. He was always pushing for new, perfect things. Maybe that should have been a sign, how he never valued the work it takes to restore something broken. Later that night, after Adam had left, Emma found herself in her spare room, where she'd stored her old restoration tools. Dust had settled on the brushes and sanders, but they felt familiar in her hands. A half-finished side table sat in the corner, its partially stripped surface telling a story of interrupted possibilities. She opened her laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard before typing, small business licenses, interior design and furniture restoration. The search results filled her screen with possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider in years. Her phone buzzed, another message from Justin, one of dozens she'd been ignoring. This time, instead of the usual mix of guilt and pain, she felt something different, gratitude. His betrayal had shattered the carefully constructed facade of her life, but maybe that's what she needed. Like the furniture she used to restore, sometimes things had to be stripped down to their bones before they could become something new, something true. Emma opened Sarah's message from the week before, finally ready to respond, I'd like to hear your story. Maybe over coffee. As she pressed send, she realized that understanding Justin's pattern of destruction wasn't about finding closure, it was about reclaiming her narrative. Each woman he'd hurt had a story, and together they formed a tapestry of resilience she was only beginning to understand. Adam texted, check your email. Found some interesting commercial spaces for rent. Perfect for a design studio. Emma felt a smile tugging at her lips, genuine for the first time in days. She looked around her apartment, seeing it with new eyes. The spaces Justin's belongings had left behind weren't empty, they were blank canvases waiting to be filled with her own vision. She picked up her grandmother's old chair, running her fingers along its worn fabric. Perhaps it was time for both of them to be renewed, transformed not into what someone else wanted them to be, but into what they were always meant to become. Her wedding dress still hung in the closet, a reminder of promises broken. But now, looking at it, Emma saw something different, not an ending, but a chrysalis she'd finally emerged from. The woman who'd chosen that dress had been living someone else's dream. The woman she was becoming had dreams of her own. The night deepened around her as she sat at her workbench, sketching designs for her first restoration project. Outside her window, the city lights painted possibilities across the darkness, each one a star in a constellation of her own making. The coffee shop where Emma agreed to meet Sarah was quiet for a Wednesday afternoon, the autumn light filtering through rain-streaked windows. Emma recognized her immediately, the woman who had tried to warn her, who had watched this pattern of destruction before. Sarah's eyes held a familiar weariness, but also something else, strength. "Lauren was my roommate for 2 years," Sarah began, wrapping her hands around her mug. "I watched Justin systematically dismantle her life the same way he did yours. The same way he did to Rebecca before her." Emma's breath caught. Rebecca? His colleague from the Seattle office. That was 3 years ago, before he transferred to Boston. Sarah's voice carried the weight of witnessed pain. "It's always the same pattern: business trips, late-night calls, promises of leaving his current relationship. He has a gift for making each woman feel like she's different, special, the one who will finally change him." The pieces of Justin's past began to align like a mosaic of carefully crafted deceptions. Emma thought about the business trips to Seattle she'd never questioned, the way he'd been so insistent on moving to Boston for a fresh start in their relationship. "Lauren's pregnant," Sarah said quietly, confirming what Emma had begun to suspect from Justin's recent texts begging to talk. "She found out last week. Justin, he's not handling it well." The news should have devastated Emma, should have reopened wounds barely beginning to heal. Instead, she felt an unexpected calm, like watching storm clouds from a safe distance. "He's running away again, isn't he?" Sarah nodded. "He's already asked for a transfer to the London office. Lauren's devastated, but I think she needed to see this side of him to finally understand what kind of man he really is." As they talked, Emma began to understand that this meeting wasn't just about sharing information, it was about breaking a cycle. Each woman in Justin's wake had carried her pain alone, thinking she was the only one, until Sarah started connecting them, creating a network of support and understanding. Later that evening, as Emma worked on refinishing an antique dresser in her newly cleared spare room, her phone lit up with Justin's name. This time, instead of ignoring it, she answered. "We need to talk," his voice carried that familiar mix of charm and desperation. "Things have gotten complicated, and I think we both made mistakes. Maybe if we just—" "I know about Lauren's pregnancy," Emma interrupted, her hand steady as she continued sanding the dresser's surface. "And about Rebecca from Seattle." The silence on the other end stretched like a confession. "Emma, those situations were different. What we had was real. What we had was a performance," she said, surprising herself with the clarity in her voice. "You're very good at it, Justin. Making each woman feel special while you're planning your next escape. But I'm not interested in being part of your pattern anymore. It's not like that. I need time to figure things out. And honestly, with all the deposits we put down for the wedding, I thought maybe we could." Emma's laugh cut him off, a sound of genuine amusement that seemed to startle them both. "Are you actually trying to leverage wedding deposits right now? While your pregnant girlfriend waits for you to figure things out?" "The vendors won't refund everything," he said, defensive now. "Someone needs to take responsibility for those costs." "You're right," Emma agreed, her voice level. "Someone does need to take responsibility. But I don't think we're talking about wedding deposits anymore." She ended the call and returned to her work, each stroke of sandpaper revealing the true grain beneath years of lacquer. Adam's words from their last conversation echoed in her mind, "You have a gift for seeing potential where others don't." Her phone buzzed again, not Justin this time, but a message from Lauren. "Sarah gave me your number. I know this is awkward, but I could really use someone to talk to who understands." Emma stared at the message, feeling the weight of choices stretching out before her. She could retreat into her own healing, focus solely on rebuilding her life. Or she could reach out, extend the same lifeline Sarah had offered her. The half-restored dresser stood as a testament to transformation in progress, its surface a patchwork of old and new, each layer telling part of its story. Emma ran her fingers along the grain, feeling the different textures beneath her skin. I understand better than most, she typed back to Lauren. And I think maybe we both deserve to write better endings to our stories. As she pressed send, Emma heard the distinct ping of an email notification. It was from a commercial real estate agent Adam had connected her with, photos of a potential space for her design studio. The old warehouse had good bones beneath its worn exterior, character hidden under years of neglect. Like so many things in her life lately, it was waiting to be stripped down, restored, reimagined. Her phone lit up again, Justin's name appearing with yet another plea to talk. This time, Emma didn't feel the usual twist of pain in her chest. Instead, she felt something else, gratitude for the clarity his betrayal had forced upon her, for the strength she was discovering in its aftermath. She turned back to her work, losing herself in the rhythmic motion of restoration. Outside, storm clouds gathered, but her hands remained steady, sure of their purpose. Sometimes, she was learning, the greatest act of defiance is not in fighting back, but in moving forward, in refusing to let someone else's betrayal define your story. The dresser beneath her hands was slowly revealing its true nature, each layer of old finish giving way to possibility. Emma smiled, recognizing her own transformation mirrored in its surface, not a story of loss, but one of revelation, of uncovering what had been there all along, waiting to emerge. The warehouse space echoed with possibility. Dust motes danced in shafts of light streaming through tall windows, illuminating worn wooden floors that had witnessed decades of stories. Emma stood in the center, Adam beside her, both silent as they absorbed the potential of the empty space. "It needs work," the realtor said apologetically, gesturing at water stains on the ceiling and the peeling paint on the walls. "But the rent is negotiable, and the location." "It's perfect," Emma interrupted softly. She could see it already, workbenches lined against the windows, a consultation area with comfortable chairs, restored pieces displayed like art installations. A place where broken things could be made beautiful again. Adam watched her face, recognizing the spark that had been missing these past weeks. "You're going to take it, aren't you?" "I think." Emma traced her fingers along a weathered support beam, feeling the honest roughness of the wood. "I think I need to. Not just for the business, but for me." Later that evening, Emma sat in her apartment surrounded by lease paperwork and business plans. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lauren, "He's gone." "Really gone this time?" "Took the London transfer." Emma's reply was immediate, "Come over. Bring ice cream." An hour later, they sat on Emma's balcony, sharing a pint of chocolate chip and the strange camaraderie of shared wounds. Lauren's hand rested protectively over her barely visible pregnancy, a gesture that spoke of choices and strength rather than victimhood. "I got the lease today," Emma said, passing Lauren a spoon. "For the design studio. The warehouse space Adam found. It's terrifying and exactly right." Emma smiled, surprising herself with how genuine it felt. "I've spent so long fitting myself into other people's visions. First with Justin, then with the corporate design firm. It's time to build something that's entirely mine." Lauren was quiet for a moment, thoughtful. "You know what's strange? When Justin left, I expected to feel destroyed. But instead, I feel light. Like I can finally breathe again." "Because you're not carrying the weight of his lies anymore," Emma observed. "Or the exhaustion of trying to be the person he wanted you to be." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker to life against the darkening sky. Emma thought about the network of women Sarah had connected, each one carrying a piece of Justin's pattern, each one finding her way back to herself. "I've been thinking about names," Lauren said suddenly. "For the baby. And I realized, I don't want any of the ones Justin and I discussed. Those names belonged to a future built on lies. I want something that represents strength instead." Emma reached over and squeezed her hand, understanding completely. A fresh start. The next morning, Emma arrived early at the warehouse, armed with coffee and determination. Adam was already there, sleeves rolled up, ready to help with the initial cleanup. You know, he said, as they worked side by side clearing debris, I've been wanting to tell you something. For years, actually. But the timing never seemed right. Emma paused, sensing the weight in his words. The sunlight caught the dust they'd stirred up, creating a gentle haze around them. You don't have to say it, she said softly, meeting his eyes. I think I've always known. But I wasn't ready then. I'm not sure I'm ready now either. Adam's smile was understanding, patient. That's okay. Some things are worth waiting for. Right now, he gestured at the space around them, this is what matters. You, building something true. They worked in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Emma's phone occasionally buzzed with messages from the group chat Sarah had created, a digital sisterhood of healing and support. Between clearing cobwebs and scrubbing windows, Emma found herself sharing photos of the warehouse's transformation, receiving enthusiastic responses and offers to help. As the day progressed, the space began to reveal its character, much like Emma herself was rediscovering hers. She uncovered original hardwood beneath layers of linoleum, found Art Deco details hidden behind cheap paneling. Each discovery felt like a metaphor for her own journey, beauty waiting to be uncovered, strength disguised as damage. Standing in a shaft of late afternoon light, Emma realized something profound: her story wasn't about Justin anymore. It wasn't about betrayal or loss or even revenge. It was about reclamation, of space, of self, of dreams long deferred. Her phone buzzed again, Justin's lawyer, this time, with a formal letter demanding repayment of his share of the wedding expenses. Emma felt the old anger rise, but it was different now. Calmer. More focused. I think, she said to Adam, who was watching her with concern, it's time to show him what real responsibility looks like. She turned back to her work, each sweep of the broom a deliberate act of creation rather than erasure. The warehouse held echoes of its industrial past, but its future, like hers, would be something entirely new. Something honest. Something strong. 6 months after the wedding that never was, Emma stood in her completed design studio, early morning light streaming through the now pristine windows. Each corner of the space told a story of transformation, from the carefully restored vintage pieces that doubled as display items to the exposed brick walls they'd uncovered beneath layers of drywall. But it was the central piece that held her attention, her grandmother's chair, reborn through hours of patient work. The morning's quiet was interrupted by a gentle knock. Lauren entered, her baby bump now prominent beneath a flowing dress. She carried a familiar cream-colored envelope, the same type that had started this journey all those months ago. It came back, Lauren said, setting the envelope on Emma's work desk. Return to sender. Apparently, Justin's not accepting mail at his London address anymore. Emma picked up the envelope containing Justin's share of the wedding expenses, feeling its weight, not just in dollars, but in lessons learned. You know what's funny? I'm actually grateful for this debt now. Lauren settled carefully into one of the consultation area's armchairs, one hand resting on her belly. Grateful? For $30,000 of wedding expenses? For the clarity it brought. Emma smiled, running her fingers along the grain of a half-restored table. Every time I restore a piece, every client I help transform their space, I'm paying off that debt. But I'm also building something he never could, something real. The studio's door chimed again as Sarah entered, followed by Rebecca, who had flown in from Seattle for their first official gathering. The sight of them together, this unlikely sisterhood born from shared wounds, filled Emma with a quiet pride. They weren't victims of Justin's betrayal anymore, they were architects of their own restoration. The website's getting attention, Sarah announced, pulling up analytics on her tablet. 3 features in design blogs last month, and the waiting list for consultations is growing. Rebecca examined a recently completed dresser, her fingers tracing the intricate inlay work. It's amazing how you've turned pain into something beautiful. Not just the furniture, but... She gestured around at all of them, this. Us. Emma thought about the journey that had brought them here. The day she'd faced Justin's lawyers with quiet determination, presenting documentation of every expense, every breach of promise. She'd seen something crack in his carefully maintained facade when she'd quoted his own words back to him from those late-night messages to Lauren. "You want to talk about financial responsibility?" she'd asked calmly. "Let's talk about the pattern of emotional fraud you've perpetrated across 3 cities. About the women whose lives you've disrupted, whose trust you've exploited. You can pay the wedding expenses, or we can have a very public conversation about responsibility." He'd paid. Not out of remorse, Emma knew, but out of self-preservation. It was the only language he truly understood. The studio's door chimed once more as Adam entered, carrying coffee for everyone, a morning ritual he'd maintained throughout the renovation process. His presence had become as essential to the studio as the restored pieces themselves, his quiet support a foundation she'd come to rely on. "The nursery furniture is ready," he announced, setting down the coffee tray. "Just finished the final coat of non-toxic sealant this morning." Lauren's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the collection of restored pieces they'd all worked on together, a crib that had been abandoned in an attic, a rocking chair with stories spanning generations, a changing table transformed from an antique washstand. Each piece represented not just hours of careful restoration, but a commitment to creating something beautiful from what had been discarded. "This baby," Lauren said, wiping her eyes, "is going to grow up surrounded by so much love and strength. Not just from me, but from all of you." Emma felt Adam's hand slip into hers, a gesture so natural now it felt like coming home. Their relationship had evolved slowly, built on a foundation of trust and understanding rather than grand promises. Each step forward was deliberate, honest, chosen rather than assumed. The morning light caught the studio's sign, "Second Chances Restoration and Design." Below it, in smaller letters, "Every piece has a story worth telling." Emma looked around at her chosen family, Lauren with her quiet determination, Sarah with her fierce protectiveness, Rebecca with her hard-won wisdom, and Adam with his steady faith in her vision. Each of them had been shaped by betrayal, but not defined by it. "You know," Emma said, picking up her tools for the day's work, "I used to think restoration was about fixing what was broken. But it's not. It's about honoring the journey of each piece, seeing the beauty in its scars, and helping it become something new without erasing where it's been." The others nodded, understanding that she wasn't just talking about furniture anymore. Outside, the city was waking up, full of possibilities. Inside, in this space they'd built together, broken pieces were finding new life, new purpose, new stories to tell. Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Justin, his first attempt at contact in months. Without opening it, she deleted the message. Some chapters were better left closed, their lessons learned, their pain transformed into purpose. She turned back to her work, hands steady on the weathered wood beneath them. Around her, the morning light touched everything, the restored pieces, the gathered family, the future they were building together, turning it all to gold.